right, let's get into topics. So this is, I can't believe I'm saying this. This is the third week we're leading our show with James Franklin. I can assure you it's the final time we'll be doing it because he was fired by Penn State after their devastating loss to Northwestern. 3 straight losses. Penn State is 0-3 in the Big Ten. This is kind of a two-part question, so I'll start with the first one. I'll ask you first, Tim. Are you surprised James Franklin was fired by Penn State midseason? Because we had talked about last week, could they move on from after the season? They decided to move on from after that loss to Northwestern. Are you surprised by it?
So we talked on the show about Mike Gundy getting fired at Oklahoma State, and my big thing about that was loyalty. Something that Mike Gundy had been a part of that program for 30 years, give or take. James Franklin, he's been with Penn State for quite some time. He's been there for a while. But they did the right thing by firing him midseason. I mean, that was an absolute joke. He put all his chips on the table versus Oregon. They had Drew Aller just not stare down his receiver. That overtime could have kept going. And then he follows it up with losses to UCLA and then Northwestern. I mean, the only thing that could have made that worse was if he lost to friggin' Rutgers. Like, yes, fire him. Bye. See ya. The whole question about him was he can beat up on the bad teams. You just can't beat the good teams. Now what? Now you threw all your chips on the table this final year, or, it ended up being final year, but you threw your chips on the table this year, and that was it? You blew it? You blew your stack? You're like, all right, hey, I'm done. I suck. I guess I can't get the job done. And then his team takes that mentality into UCLA in Northwestern. I mean, what a joke. Yeah, he absolutely deserved to get fired. That was, I mean, I think we were all shocked. But then when we sat and thought about it, we're like, yeah, makes sense.
When you can lose games, you can't lose the locker room. And I feel like after that loss to Northwestern, I kind of have a rule that this is more of an NFL thing than a college football thing. But if you lose 3 games in a row, I can't consider you a contender because you lose games, no one's going to go undefeated. You lose a game, then you lose another one. Okay, it's kind of a slump. You need to get that next one and you still lose unless there's any catastrophic injuries. Then I can't necessarily take you seriously as a contender. And I think, like you said, Tim, based on the expectations Penn State had, national championship aspirations, went to the college football playoff semifinal a year ago, Big Ten championship aspirations, and now that kind of goes up in smoke. I'll ask you, Arthur, you're the Ohio State fan, Big Ten guy. Were you surprised they moved on from James Franklin after this 3rd straight loss? They obviously fall to 0-3 in the Big Ten. Are you surprised they moved on from a midseason?
I knew that Tim was going to bring up Mike Gundy, and that was the first thing I was thinking, honestly. I'm being so serious. It was the first thing that I thought in my mind, especially yesterday, after my take yesterday. I was like, dang, Mike Gundy is going to come up at some point tomorrow. I know he is if we talk about this. But listen, man, when you let UCLA, who has not led at all before they played you, right? And now they're 2-4 on the season. When you're the first win, and now with UCLA's second win, and then you have these little people throughout college football talking about, oh, is UCLA, looking to make a run the rest of the season? That's how you know it's like, hey, hang on a second. Like, we started that. We were James, you started that. Like, what's wrong with you? Nah, you gotta go. You gotta go. And it wasn't going to get any easier throughout the rest of the year because, again, you lose to Oregon, you lose to UCLA, you lose to Northwestern. With how the season was going, you for daggone sure was going to lose to us. Like, you were not going to beat the Ohio State Buckeyes, and that definitely would have been the final straw if they decided to keep you on. It is very unfortunate because, as I said yesterday, he's able to recruit every position except the quarterback. Tim has brought this up previously, and I said in defense, Trace McSorley wasn't bad, but Drew Aller isn't getting the job done. Your quarterback before and after Trace McSorley didn't get the job done. But you've had Saquon Barkley, you've had Jahad Johnson, you've had Micah Parsons, you've had plenty of talent. But again, when it just comes to these big games, you can't get it done. And sometimes you have coaches like that, where you have all the talent in the world, you just can't get it done. And I hate to, bring up Tim's Florida Gators, but look at Florida. a great, talented Florida Gators team whose coach just can't seem to get it done.
Meanwhile, every school we play, we're that talented.
So I mean, like you just have those coaches, right, where they're good enough, but not great. They're not elite. They don't deserve to be in those upper echelon of coaches. You hope and you give them grace that they will be, that they could be, and you give them all the chances in the world. But they just continue to let you down when they should not be letting you down, when they don't need to be letting you down. So it's not surprising. It isn't surprising. As Tim said with Mike Gundy, he's loyal. They don't finish out the season. But again, when you let UCLA do what they did and you let Oregon do what they did, and it just seems like, you know what, it's not going to get any better, you got to let them go.
And the thing with Oklahoma State, it's kind of apples to oranges because Oklahoma State has been bad for multiple years now. Penn State has obviously been a Big Ten contender for a long time. James Franklin, led them to a Big Ten title back in 2016. I think I and a lot of people thought they should have made the playoff that year. They did make the playoff last year, went deep. And it's again, I feel like you cannot lose the 3 games that they lost in a row consecutively, the way that they lost it, and still maintain credibility in the locker room. You just can't, especially now Drew Aller, God bless him, is done for the season. We're all praying for his quick recovery. So I'll ask you now, Tim, because now the discussion is, okay, who's going to be Penn State's next coach? And naturally, right after James Franklin news broke, hey, it's going to be Kurt Cignetti, maybe for the coach from Indiana, and we'll talk about him later on, on today's show. And then he signs a long-term extension with Indiana. There's been names like Saban, Urban Meyer, former Gators coach, obviously. Who would you suggest Penn State go after? Who do you think that they will hire to be the next head coach of the Nittany Lions?
That's a great question. I think that what Penn State should do is they need to go after a young offensive mind. I don't think Urban Meyer is going to come back. I don't think Nick Saban's going to come back. I mean, just watching College game day before we even hopped on here, you had Miss Terry say that Nick ain't coming back, basically. And so it's I think what Penn State needs to do, because even though Penn State's teams have always been structured defensively, they've always been a defensive first, their famous number 11 is basically for a defensive player who's a stud, LeVar Arrington, Micah Parsons, so on and so forth. They need a young offensive mind to come in and change their offense. That is the one thing Penn State has always lacked. Every time they got into a big game or a big game situation, they needed that drive to go and win the game. Could you ever really trust their quarterback to do it? Because I never could. And if they did it, it was like, oh, okay, nice. But I would still leave that game saying, I don't like their quarterback. And listen, I think Drew Aller, is a good kid. I feel bad. Again, prayers up for him, and he makes a quick recovery, and he can get back to playing football again. But it was one of those things that I always thought that the quarterback position was weak on Penn State. Arthur, you brought it up. Old Trace McSorley. I never trusted Trace McSorley. So, yeah, I think it's a situation that I can't pinpoint an exact coach, but I think that they need to go after a young offensive mind to change things up.
We're kind of on the same wavelength. I'll say my take of who the coach should be after Arthur finishes. But Arthur, we kind of talked about this yesterday. You were on Carving It Up, and you were, we were kind of speculating, would Urban Meyer maybe come back to the Big Ten? And Nick Saban, as Tim mentioned, is there a name you have in mind that could potentially be the new head coach of the Penn State Nittany Lions in 2026?
Well, as you said yesterday, as you said just now, you'll get your pick. So I'm not going to say it, right? But we are on the same wavelength. So to echo though what Tim said, dude, when you talk about game-winning drives, right? I always think about this, well, not always, but this play comes to my mind quite frequently when it comes to Ohio State Buckeyes and the Penn State Nittany Lions. Christian Hackenberg, this was a few years ago. Christian Hackenberg, Penn State quarterback, right? They have a chance to either win the game or tie against us. I'm pretty sure it was at Penn State, and Joey Bosa comes off the right side, right? It was the last play. It was the do or die play for Penn State. Joey Bosa comes off the right side, and Saquon Barkley's trying to guard him, right? This was when Joey Bosa was Joey freaking Bosa. And Joey Bosa just pushes Saquon right into Hackenberg and gets the sack. That's just one of those things where it's like, holy shit. Right? Like, it's just one of those plays where again, it's just etched in my memory. Like that's Ohio State football right there. But that also, again, that's been Penn State football to where we're so close, but yet we're just so freaking far. So again, Bryson, I'm gonna let you give the head coach take because I agree with it. But I also agree with Tim. They definitely need an offensive mind who can definitely recruit the quarterback position. And Bryson, you and I agree that coach should be who?
Joe Brady, offensive coordinator from the Buffalo Bills. Obviously, he has a history at LSU, passing game coordinator, helped Joe Burrow have arguably the greatest season in college football history. I mean, the Buffalo Bills were kind of they didn't really have an offensive identity after Brian Dable left to be the head coach of the Giants. They fired their OC, Ken Dorsey. Then here comes Joe Brady. Now they run the football well. Now their offensive line's playing well. Now Josh Allen's playing the best ball of his career. I think Joe Brady, we talk about young offensive minds. There you go. He's got a college background. Was successful at LSU. He's never been a head coach certainly at this level before. I think it'd work.
Can I also? So it's funny you say that because watching the Bills-Pats game Sunday Night Football, they even mentioned, I think it was the broadcast. It was either broadcast or Boston radio, whatever. Terry Pagula has a history with Penn State. And okay. I heard
owner of the Bills, by the way, yeah.
Yeah, the owner of the Bills. That he was the one who was like, all right, we're done with Franklin. We got to get somebody else in there. And we'll approach that when it happens. But how perfect, if true, if Terry Pagula, is that guy, how great would that be? You have your offensive coordinator for your team, and then you could just basically say, hey, you want this job? It's right there. It's easy money.
That's an interesting nugget. Yeah, I wasn't aware of that, but that's really interesting.